I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this is Killer Destinations.
A young man majoring in astrophysics joined a college club that promised to explore mysticism, energy, and natural forces. And when he wound up dead, everyone assumed his new friends were behind it. But detectives soon discovered not everything was as it seemed.
Today's destination is Chatsworth, California. The city is a suburban neighborhood in Los Angeles and located in the San Fernando Valley. It was named after the Grand Chatsworth House in Derbyshire, England, the estate of the Duke of Devonshire. This nod to English heritage is also reflected in many of the city's street names, like Devonshire Avenue. Chatsworth has also been called Hollywood's backyard because of the rugged natural scenery of the Santa Susana Mountains and the fact that the historic Iverson Movie Ranch is located there. And this served as a major filming location, especially for Westerns. Some of the iconic movies and TV shows filmed there included Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Tarzan, The Karate Kid, and my personal favorite as a child, Charlie's Angels.
Exactly.
Today, Chatsworth is an affluent area that is home to high-tech companies, equestrian communities, and a vibrant local business scene. It also offers a blend of rustic charm and suburban comfort, attracting nature lovers as well as those seeking a peaceful, private lifestyle away from central Los Angeles. But in 1990, the natural beauty of the Santa Susana Mountains was radically diminished when the area became the site of a gruesome murder.
The city of Chatsworth is also known because it was once home base for Charles Manson and his horde of followers. On the western edge of the city, nestled against the foothills of the Santa Susana Mountains, is Chatsworth Park. Now, in addition to playgrounds and acres of athletic fields, this park has a multitude of rocky hills and hiking trails that attract outdoor enthusiasts. Now, there are also railroad tracks there that cuts through the mountain, and it's called the Chatsworth Tunnel. Even though it was named the Chatsworth Tunnel, it used to be called, and probably still is by a few, the Manson Tunnel, because Charles Manson's compound was nearby, and some of Manson's followers were known to hang out in the tunnel. And as you approach the entrance, someone long ago had spray painted the words Holy Terror in capitals on the concrete right above it, so it is the last thing you see as you enter. Now, once inside, the walls are covered with graffiti, mostly words about drugs and symbols that are linked to the occult. Now, in the local community, residents had heard stories of strange activities, including animal sacrifices, taking place there at night. But even in the light of day, the inside of the tunnel was still a spooky place, even without the specter of the Manson family. But even in the light of day, this tunnel still has the spookiest vibe. The area around the tunnel was known as a place where people would gather to practice their beliefs and celebrate certain holidays. So on Thursday, June 21st, 1990, followers of Wicca gathered to celebrate the summer solstice. And what came next? Shocked everybody.
Shortly after 3 a.m., a 911 call came into LAPD dispatch from a group of frantic teenagers. And so, Kath, what happened is that these teens told police they'd been hiking in the area. Now, who knows if they were hiking
drinking.
Yeah, exactly. They were probably drinking in the area.
Yeah.
Anyway, they dared each other to go into this tunnel. Now, the tunnel has railroad tracks going through it, and they were still used for an active train route. So these teenagers go into this very spooky, pitch black tunnel, and they're poking each other, laughing, screwing around, walking on these train tracks when all of a sudden they hit something. They actually physically kick something, and they know immediately that it's a body. They turn on their flashlight, face it toward the ground, and they're looking at the body of a young man, clearly dead, who was covered in blood. So they run out of the tunnel, they go find a phone, and detectives arrive at the scene to collect evidence. Now, the detectives weren't particularly concerned because, like we said, it was an active train tunnel. They thought this guy was probably a transient who'd been hit by a train. So they send the body to the LA coroner's office, and the autopsy noted that this young man had been stabbed 18 times and his throat had been slashed. But there was no wallet or any identifying information on him, so the coroner's office simply named him John Doe 135. Fortunately, detectives didn't have to wait long to identify the victim. Just hours after the body was discovered, a second 911 call came in that gave them the name they'd been looking for. 3 hours prior, at midnight on June 21st, and Kathy said this was the summer solstice, Galen and Kay Baker received a call. The person on the other end was a male, but he had a very strange, raspy voice, and he simply said, "We have your son. Unless you give us $100,000 by 5 p.m. tomorrow, your son will die." But the caller didn't give these people any directions on how to get the money to them. So Mr. and Mrs. Baker, of course, immediately call their son. They have one son, 21-year-old Ronald, who went by Ron, and this kid was a straight-A student at UCLA, majoring in astrophysics. I mean, talk about not a slacker. So they called his apartment freaking out. They were hoping he was there and it was just a prank call. So he has two roommates. One is his best friend that he's known forever, a childhood friend named Duncan Martinez. And the other roommate was Nathan Blaylock. And Nathan knew Ron and Duncan for about a year. Anyway, so Mr. and Mrs. Baker call up freaking out, and Duncan and Nathan say, "We don't know where Ron is. We dropped him off at the bus stop around 9 p.m. because he was meeting up with some friends from a campus club that he recently joined, but he hasn't come home." And the fact that they dropped him off at a bus stop was not unusual. Ron took the bus everywhere he went. He never drove anywhere. So the next morning, Ron still hadn't returned home. And of course, Mr. and Mrs. Baker are freaking out. But by mid-morning, they received another call from the kidnapper. Now, it was the same voice with the same message. $100,000 by 5 p.m. or Ron dies. But again, no instructions on how to get the money to the kidnappers. And now, Mr. Baker, he's too worried. He can't stand this anymore, so he called 911. So the police come over, they put a trace on the Baker's home phone, and once again, wait for another phone call. They're hoping for, the follow-up phone call with delivery instructions. But the kidnapper never called back. Detectives naturally were worried that meant that Ron had already been killed. And so one of the detectives asked the Bakers for a photo of Ron, and the detectives sent it to the coroner to see if it was a match. It was. John Doe 135 was Ron Baker.
So, just a little interesting tidbit with the man Kathy has been infatuated with for decades.
I love you, Michael Connelly.
So if you listen to our episode 228, this was on January 13th, and if you haven't listened, please do. And now you have to download.
If you haven't listened, what the hell's wrong with you?
Exactly. You call yourself a listener. But he played a key role in that. That's when Kathy professed her love. "I love you, Michael Connelly, moi, moi, moi," all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But he's back in this episode too, because in 1990, he was actually a crime reporter for the LA Times when this murder happened. And Kath, I was super surprised to learn, because I had looked this up, how long did he stay working for the LA Times after he started publishing? And it turned out he actually waited until his third book was released and became a bestseller like the others before he said sayonara.
I am surprised at that. But also, it's like you can tell he's one of these guys, like if you ever hear him talk about, being a reporter, and, he also obviously does a couple podcasts.
I don't like to listen to him talk.
But I know, Kathy does not like his voice.
I cannot stand it.
But you could tell he loved his job as a reporter.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe he had people giving him inside scoop to be like, "I'll tell you what you want, just stop talking."
Or, "I want my name in your book."
Exactly. But there's a book called The Poet. I mean, I feel like everybody should start at the beginning, but there's a book called The Poet that is unbelievable. So Michael Connelly, The Poet.
So, according to a July 1990 article in the LA Times by Michael Conley and Steve Padilla, Ron Baker was, by all accounts, a thoughtful, quiet, and very shy young man who kept to himself. He grew up in Woodland Hills, which is also in the valley, and he was tall and skinny, curly blonde hair, and usually wore tie-dye t-shirts and jeans. While at school, Ron became involved in the student Christian ministry on the UCLA campus. And as we said, he was a 4.0 in astrophysics, so it was no surprise that he was just generally intellectually curious about the world and the way it worked, and wanted to learn about things he didn't know. But Kath, what detectives found out was that earlier in 1990, Ron had joined a student group called the Mystic Circle. And through a member of this group, he began studying Wicca, and it fascinated him because Wicca's belief in energy and forces kind of paralleled what he studied as an astrophysicist. So detectives, Kath, went to the apartment that Ron shared with Duncan and Nathan to take a look into Ron's room and see if there might be something that would give them a clue about who might want to kill him. The first thing they saw when they walked into the room was this small kind of side table in the corner. Some of the things I read, Kathy, described it as an altar. I'm going with table.
Yeah.
Now, on this table, there were witchcraft books, a pentagram-decorated candle, and a flyer for the campus group Mystic Circle that basically was just promoting its devotion to shamanism and magic. And I thought it was funny, Kathy, because magic was spelled with a CK on the end.
Okay, so Kath, according to Google...
Ooh, then it's right.
It's totally right.
Okay, good.
Aleister Crowley was the first person to use the term magic, spelling it with a CK, in order to emphasize a spiritual or mystical practice aimed at causing change in accordance with one's will.
So as opposed to like pulling a rabbit out of a hat.
Yes, rather than the mere stage tricks and illusions.
Ooh.
Yeah, so pretty much it's really about demonic possession, it turns out.
Oh, okay, good to know.
That was just my editorializing.
Okay, good.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, adding this information about what they found on the table to the knowledge that Ron was killed on the summer solstice, and knowing that the coroner had found Ron wearing two necklaces, one was a cross and one was a pentagram surrounded by the circle, detectives began looking into whether Ron's exploration of the occult was actually what got him killed. One of the detectives actually speculated that maybe Ron's study had moved him from like the light side of Wicca into the dark side of occult beliefs. But Ron's family, they didn't buy it. They weren't aware that he was studying Wicca, but they said it didn't surprise them because he had always been curious about other religions and religious practices, and even at one point he had explored Buddhism, but he steadfastly remained a Christian. And so the Bakers said, you know what, we don't believe in your theory that Wicca got him killed. We just believe that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And soon, detectives realized that the occult angle was a red herring, and they moved on to other possibilities.
When toxicology results came back, detectives were surprised to learn that Ron had been totally hammered the night he was killed. And here's the thing, Kath. Friends and family said he was a light drinker. He really mostly didn't drink. And so if he drank at all, it was just a beer. So they were surprised to learn that his blood alcohol level was 0.21 when he died.
Dang.
I know.
Good thing he took the bus.
Exactly. Seriously. So detectives needed to speak, of course, in greater detail to Ron's roommates and basically say, okay, you guys said you dropped him off of the bus. Like, we need the bigger picture. So they, it turns out, were the last people to have seen Ron alive, according to what the detectives could piece together, and they wanted to know more about what happened in the 24 hours prior.
And they're also going to know more than Ron's parents about his day-to-day life because he hadn't lived at home in 3 years.
Oh, I didn't realize it'd been that long.
Well, he's 21, so I'm assuming he moved out freshman year.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So both of the young men agreed to speak with detectives, but in the meantime, Ron's funeral was held. And Duncan was a pallbearer at the funeral and delivered one of the eulogies. And he spoke of Ron as the friendliest, sweetest guy who would talk to anybody and be there for anybody at the drop of a dime. And he basically concluded by saying, I hope that it's something I can get over because I love him. It's just hard to think of a time without Ron.
And you know, Kath, from what I read, Duncan was this outgoing, gregarious guy. Even though he was a valley dude, he looked like a surfer, total bleach blonde hair, but outgoing. He was, charming and gregarious and had a story for everybody. Whereas Ron was the exact opposite, as we said. He was very serious, very studious, skinny, big curly hair and whatnot, but he was sweet. However, in high school, that means you get picked on.
Mm-hmm.
And so Duncan actually, they became close because Duncan actually was sticking up for Ron and protecting him. And, a cool kid brings you into their circle, you're cool adjacent.
Right.
You're not cool, but you're at least cool adjacent. So people know who you are and they get to know that you're a sweet kid.
Yeah.
So what he said at the eulogy was no surprise because everything he said to the parents, to detectives, was all about, he was so important to me. He was the nicest person I knew. And Kath, they even stayed close after high school because Ron, with his high IQ, went on to college, but Duncan didn't go to college. He actually got a job and joined the Marine Reserves. But they got an apartment together, and so that's how they were able to stay close, even though their paths diverged. And then just really quickly too, Kath, the other thing about Nathan, the third roommate, he was actually from Detroit, big football guy in high school, big boxer, and right out of high school, he joined the Army. After he got out of the Army after a 4-year stint, but he actually moved to LA. And at that time, Ron and Duncan just happened to be looking for a roommate. And so Nathan answered the ad and they brought him in.
So at the time detectives circled back for interviews, Nathan was out of town for work. So they sat down with Duncan first. And Duncan was like, look, I already told you, Nathan and I dropped Ron off at the bus stop. Ron went to join his friends, his Mystic Circle group. They were talking about the summer solstice, and that's the last time I saw him. And so, he basically repeated the same story. And so then detectives, when they were able to sit down with Nathan a few days later, he was like, exactly as Nathan said it. That's exactly how it happened.
Did he just walk in and sit down and go, ditto?
Yep. But a couple of things they said didn't add up to detectives. First, both of them told police that when Ron's father told Duncan about the kidnapping and ransom demand, Duncan and Nathan went out to try to find Ron and had driven to Chatsworth Park. They told detectives we drove out there because we knew that it was one of Ron's favorite places to go and meditate. And detectives thought, why in the world would you think a kidnapper would take him to his favorite meditation place? That's kind of weird.
Well, kidnapping is stressful.
Yeah. The second thing was that detectives discovered that several days after Ron's body was found, Duncan cashed a check for $109 from Ron. And so the detectives were like, what's this about? And Duncan was like, oh, Ron owed me money and he had given me this check. I just didn't have time to put it in the bank. But detectives were like, this is odd. So they consulted a handwriting expert and they gave him samples of Ron's handwriting. And the expert was like, yeah, this signature on the check was forged. So about a month after Ron's murder, detectives approached Duncan and were like, hey, we're really bothered by a couple things. Can you take a polygraph? And Duncan was like, I had nothing to do with it. This guy is my best friend. You're barking up the wrong tree, but I will take the polygraph. Then two things happened almost simultaneously. Duncan failed the polygraph and then dipped.
Did he dip? Did he dippity-doo-dah?
He did that.
Okay. Oh, dear God.
It's been so long since I've done that.
I've got to go. This has to end the podcast.
She's about to break the microphone.
I was going to throw my Prosecco on you, but I didn't want to waste a good Prosecco. Vintage 2026.
We literally, this is like, we're behaving in this like it's a Patreon episode.
That's true.
We got to put our serious hats back on.
But it's also late and I haven't seen you for a while because you've been at the hospital with your brother for so long that
exactly
we get together
and just
all bets are off.
Get goofy. Exactly.
Now, Kath, it would be 18 months before Duncan Martinez would surface again. And it was in February of 1992 when LAPD detective Rick Jackson, who was in charge of the case, received a call from an attorney in Utah who said he was calling on behalf of Duncan Martinez. Now, Kath, how Duncan turned up in Utah is a crazy story. In late autumn of 1991, so this is just over a year after Ron Baker was killed, Jonathan Wayne Miller was driving on a highway in Utah when he got pulled over for speeding. The trooper comes up, asks him for his license. He hands it to him. The trooper goes back to his car, make sure nothing funny's going on. And it comes up with a felony warrant from the FBI.
Dun, 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 dun.
That's Dragnet.
Oh, well, so what? That's okay.
Well, that comes in too. Now, according to a Dateline episode in May of 2023, here's what actually happened. When Duncan Martinez adiosed out of LA, he went to the East Coast and eventually turned up in Boston, where he's now going by the name Jonathan Wayne Miller, the name on the driver's license handed to the Utah trooper. So, Kath, what happened is he walked into a passport office, totally gets like old school, crotchety old passport officer, and he's like, dude, I'm paraphrasing. Dude, I need a passport right now. It's so urgent. I'm leaving on a plane to Paris in like 4 hours. Can you hook me up? And the man was like, sure, let me see all your documents. And so Jonathan Miller passes over a folder of documents and the passport officer starts going through it. And he's like, these are great and all, but you're missing two very important things. I need a passport photo. And he also didn't have a photo ID. And so Jonathan Miller says, okay, we'll be right back. He and his two friends leave. They come back with the passport photos and nothing else. And so the passport officer said, dude, where's your photo ID? And he goes, oh, that's what these two guys are here for. They're going to tell you that they know my name. My name is Jonathan Wayne Miller. They're here to attest to the reality of who I am.
There's two alcoholic transients standing there in shady trench coats.
Exactly. And the passport officer was like, okay, you can't do that. It has to be a blood relative who identifies you. I don't know, a mother or father. And Jonathan goes, that's not possible. I had a shitty childhood. I was abused. I finally left home and school because I had to run away. And I only have an 8th grade education. And the passport officer was like, too bad, so sad. I can't help you with this. So the Miller pulls out another document and goes, here you go. I gotcha. It was a social security card.
The crusty old guy's like, last I checked, Social Securities don't have photo ID, buddy.
And not only that, but in addition to knowing it wasn't actually a photo ID, he noticed that the Social Security card was a newly issued Social Security card. And Jonathan Wayne Miller is in his early to mid 20s. And so usually when they see that, it means that it is fraudulent. And so the passport officer said, no, thank you. Go get a photo ID and then come back. And so Jonathan Miller and his two little hoodlum friends leave, and they never come back, shockingly. So the next morning, when the passport officer comes into work, he talks to his friends, and he's like, hey, did this dude come back when I was gone? And they're like, nope, haven't seen him. So he starts looking into it, because he's like, this is totally sketch. Again, paraphrasing. I got to find out what this guy's up to. One of the things he gave him were his school transcripts. And it was from a school in nearby Webster, which is where it said he was from. And so he calls the guidance counselor at the school and he's like, can you explain to me what some of these classes are? It says English 1, English 2. What grade are they going to be in when they take this? And he's like, freshman and sophomore year. And he's like, for a kid who dropped out in 8th grade, that's kind of a trick. So then he pulls out a magnifying glass and it starts looking at every single little piece of small print that he can find on these transcripts. And in one paragraph down at the very bottom of the page, it has a reference to a California state achievement test.
I love that this passport officer is digging.
Totally.
No.
He took pride in his job. He wasn't letting this asshole get away with it.
100%.
So what did he do next? He called the FBI to report it.
Oh my God, I love it.
So I do too. And that's why there was a warrant out for Jonathan Wayne Miller when he was pulled over by the Utah trooper. So the Utah trooper takes him into custody. They go down to the jail and Jonathan Miller, and we're putting that name in quotes now, appears before the judge. And the judge says, what's your name?
Did he go, Puddintain, ask me again, I'll tell you the same?
I think he did because he didn't believe his name was Puddintame. I don't know that he actually said Puddintame. I think we're paraphrasing on that too. But he actually wouldn't tell the judge his name. He said, I'm Jonathan Miller. And he said, nice try, small fry. You know what you're going to get to do? Go to the pokey. And you spend some time in there and think if you can remember what your actual name was.
Kathy got the original court transcripts, and this is exactly what happened.
Exactly. It's weird. So Jonathan Miller decided he didn't want to spend any time in jail. And so he said, my name is Duncan Martinez. And Kath, it turned out Duncan had been living in Utah for several months, ever since he dipped from Massachusetts after the nosy busybody passport officer asked too many questions. And so, Kath, the reason the Utah attorney called the LAPD is, Duncan knew he was fleeing from LA. Even though he wasn't under arrest, he didn't want to go back there. So the Utah attorney said, Duncan would be interested in talking to you if they would agree to a deal. LAPD detectives Jackson and Garcia decided, we've got to bring Duncan back. He's got answers. It's been 20 months since Ron Baker was killed. And every day that went by, they were more and more convinced that Duncan was not only involved, but very well could have been the mastermind. Detectives hadn't lost track of Nathan in all this time that Duncan's been dipping, because Nathan had decided to go into Riverside County, it's about 60 miles east of Los Angeles, and rob a bank. And he was caught. And so he was spending quite a few years out there. So he was on ice. They weren't worried about him dipping and not having access to him, but they knew that Duncan would talk. So detectives said, okay, you know what? We will make a deal with Duncan. They told his attorney that if Duncan would come back to Los Angeles to answer questions, they would give him immunity from prosecution with a twist. They called it King for a Day.
The deal was that the LAPD would allow Duncan to speak freely for 1 day. Anything he said during this conversation could not be used against him in court. So it was kind of like a deal with the devil. It's like they didn't have any evidence to convict anyone for Ron's murder, but they just had the sense that Nathan and Duncan were somehow involved. So they wanted Duncan to roll on Nathan. So the twist of being king for the day was that if detectives got corroborating evidence from someone else as to Duncan's complicity, they could use that information for trial. Because remember, Duncan was saying, I have nothing to do with the murder. I have nothing to do, blah, 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 blah. So if with King for a Day, he vomited out that he was part of it, and they're like, oh crap, we just gave this guy immunity. They didn't want that to happen. So they said, you're saying you're innocent. So if we get corroborating information that you're complicit in this, you're toast. And you can never repeat what you tell us when you are king for a day. So all of this information you're revealing to us is sealed. Zip it, lock it, put it in your pocket. They basically said, if we find out you've told anyone, we can use any of it against you in trial. So Duncan agreed, and he spilled all the horrific details. And he was like, okay, here's the deal. There was an episode of Dragnet that kind of inspired this plan. Nathan and I had been watching this TV show, and the episode was about a kidnapping. And Nathan said to me, hey, we should do this because it looks like a good way to make some quick money. And so Duncan tells the detectives that the two of them agreed, but unlike the perp and Dragnet, they weren't going to get caught. They also discussed the fact that the victim couldn't survive so that he couldn't later identify them. So Duncan is telling this to the detectives. And of course, the detectives are horrified, but they're chilling. They're acting all cool. But Duncan insists that although he had this conversation with Nathan, he was joking. He said, we were screwing around. Like it was in a joking manner. There's no way I thought it was possible for him to kill Ron. So Nathan decided that we were going to put this prank into action. And, again, I just thought we were going to Chatsworth Park to have a few beers. So, Kath, the story that Duncan told contradicted his earlier statement that he had told the police. And in the prior statement, he said that all three of them got along wonderfully, but it turns out that Nathan and Ron never got along. But anyway, Detective Jackson just listened patiently, took his notes, wrote things on the paper like this guy's a sociopath.
No, I'm sure he did.
He thought about it. But Detective Jackson thought Duncan's story was a little bit unbelievable. But at the same time, he thought, why would Duncan kill Ron? They were best friends. He had protected Ron from bullies in high school. Like, maybe it's all on Nathan. But Duncan didn't put a stop to any of it. But as Duncan continued speaking and giving a chronology of events on the night it happened, Detective Jackson was like, whoa. Because Duncan told the detective that on the night Ron was killed, he and Nathan lied to Ron and told him they were going to meet some girls in Chatsworth Park on the night of the solstice. So as they walked down the railroad tracks through this tunnel, Nathan tripped and Ron laughed and made a joke about it. And Duncan said Nathan got so pissed off and attacked Ron with a Marine Corps K-bar knife. Now, this knife had been borrowed from Duncan. Duncan heard Ron pleading for help. So he is being attacked by Nathan, this guy that he doesn't particularly care for, but Duncan did nothing. And instead of helping Ron, Duncan told Nathan, make sure he's dead. And the detective was like, you said what? And Duncan was like, I didn't want Ron to suffer. I didn't want Ron to suffer. So he watched Nathan cut Ron's throat. Then he and Nathan left the park. They went to a payphone where Nathan then insisted that Duncan call Ron's father, disguise his voice, say it was a kidnapping, and demand money. Which, of course, Mr. Baker, if Duncan were using his normal voice, would have identified him. So Duncan tells the detective, hey, I only made that call because I knew if I didn't, Nathan would kill me. This guy's a maniac. I'd be dead too. So the detective was like, well, what'd you guys do later? And he goes, well, we dumped the murder weapon and then we went home. We had to clean up. But now we have to act like, nothing's wrong. Everything's normal. So we had previously been invited to a party in our apartment building. And so, of course, we had to show up. So we went to the party. And then the detective was like, well, what about the next day? Did you make the call the next day? And Duncan was like, well, yeah, I made another ransom call. I had to. Nathan insisted on it. This whole plot was Nathan's idea. I was afraid he was going to kill me, so I went along with it.
But, obviously the detectives didn't believe Duncan.
They were like, liar, liar, pants on fire.
Exactly. And, they'd seen this countless times before. And, in the Dateline episode that I saw that I referenced earlier, there was a French term. I'm hoping because you speak French-ish.
Coup de grace.
No. But it was like...
Bonjour.
That's it. I honestly don't remember what it was. I didn't write it down, even phonetically. But basically, the detective was referring to a term where, one person might be predisposed or in favor of doing something bad. They're not necessarily going to do it themselves, but you bring in a second person who's similarly inclined, and now those two together are one big bad idea.
Oh, I know that. It's, voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir?
That's it.
Do you remember that song?
Yes, but I don't think that's the word.
Dude, I got an F in French. I know nothing.
That's true, you did.
Bonjour. Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, as the interview wrapped up, Detective Jackson just flat out said to Duncan, did you kill Ron? And Duncan was like, dude, no, it was Nathan. And Detective Jackson said, remember, you are king for a day right now. So if you did kill him, we can't ever use it against you. So out with it. And Duncan said, nope. Now, before Duncan left, detectives had one other thing they needed from him, and that was his blood. During Ron's autopsy, the coroner had actually found blood under Ron's fingernails, and they assumed the blood belonged to the perpetrator. But detectives never made this detail public. Now, in 1990, when Ron was killed, DNA was in its infancy, and even in 92, when Duncan was having this conversation, it still wasn't widely used. But by practice, they typed the blood, hoping it would at least be able to help them eliminate suspects. It turned out that the blood under Ron's fingernails was AB positive. It did not match Ron, and it's actually one of the rarest blood types in the world. Only 3 to 4% of the population has it. So following Duncan's confession, police had the blood from under Ron's fingernails tested against Duncan's blood, and it was not a match. So Duncan was allowed to leave and toddled on back to Utah. You had to know somebody was going to toddle in this episode.
Exactly.
Almost didn't get it in there.
I'm glad it's Duncan toddling. Detectives got a warrant for Nathan's blood since he was in the pokey, and his blood was a match. So even though Duncan headed back to Utah, detectives were like, we're not done with you yet. We need you to talk to Nathan and get Nathan to admit to the killing. So Duncan called Nathan in jail. So they chatted for a little bit, and then Duncan said, hey, my mom called me and told me that the police were at her house talking about my blood type. And so during this phone call, he's like, Nathan, remember when we did this, how you got your hand scratched? Do you think the police have your blood? And Nathan was like, you know what? I had the same thought. But I don't think this line's secure.
Duh.
Yeah, exactly. So next time you come to visit me, we can talk about it. So detectives were like, oh boy, of course jailhouse phones are... There's literally a recording that says this will be recorded. So anyway, detectives were like, okay, Duncan, you're going to fly your ass back from Utah to Riverside. And you're going to wear a wire, which he did. So Duncan shows up to the Riverside jail where his buddy Nathan is, and he's wearing a wire, essentially. So during their conversation, Nathan was whispering the entire time. He didn't want anyone around to hear them, but what he didn't know, obviously, was that Duncan was recording it regardless. So detectives were able to hear every single thing that Nathan whispered, but he made zero admissions. He just downplayed everything. So detectives now are like, okay, we got to have Duncan take one more shot at this. We need an admission. We only have circumstantial evidence and it's flimsy at best. So Duncan called the jail again. And this time he said there was a warrant out for his arrest and that he was afraid he'd have to take the rap for Ron's murder when it was Nathan who had done it. And so Nathan was like, listen, calm down, stop freaking out. Just tell them I didn't do it. I don't know who did. So Duncan says, look, I am mentally screwed up. I feel so much guilt about what we did to Ron. And Nathan was like, no, man, just ask God for forgiveness. That's what I did. It doesn't make me feel much better, but I'm able to function. And then Nathan said, what happened that night was a mistake. So now they have enough that they're going to go talk to Nathan. Detectives followed up with a visit to the jail to see Nathan, and they shared the audio tapes of Duncan telling them that it was Nathan who killed Ron. And when Nathan heard the recordings, he just hung his head. And so very quietly, one of the detectives asked him, how many times did you stab Ron? And Nathan whispered, twice. And it was the confession that detectives were looking for. So in October of 1993, more than 3 years after Ron Baker was brutally murdered, Nathan Blaylock was arrested for first-degree murder. And he had to take all the blame because Duncan had been king for a day.
After all this happened, Duncan's back in Park City and he was enrolled in college. But he's still the same person. He's gregarious, he's charming. All the guys want to be his friend, all the girls want to date him. And he was totally like popular man on campus. He even joined a fraternity and met a sorority girl named Melissa who he started dating. Now, Kath, as they got to know each other, he told her that he'd witnessed a murder a few years earlier and was helping the police with it. And he's like, well, actually, a roommate and I talked about going after another friend of ours, and there had been an intentional plan that he'd been part of, but he wasn't actually involved in the murder. Well, now, Melissa initially assumed he was making it all up, but then it kind of freaked her out. Like, what if he's not making all this up? So she told some friends. And then they told two friends, and then they told two friends.
And so on, and so on, and so on.
And pretty soon, it was the talk of the university. And Duncan found out that Melissa leaked the story, and so he broke up with her. But my question is, why did you tell her in the first place? You know how women are. You're going to tell your friends. No, you're going to tell your friends.
If a girl tells you she's going to keep your secret, what she means really is she and her friends are going to keep your secret.
Exactly. And he should have known better. But the fraternity he had joined, where he was Mr. BMOC, did not like the notoriety that came with his freaky story, so they kicked him out. And his friends were kind of freaked out too, so now he's kind of all alone on this campus. So a few months later, in late December 1993, a burglar alarm went off in a sporting goods store in the middle of the night. Police were dispatched to the scene and they caught the guy. And he confessed, yep, I did it. I'm sorry. I've got a really good excuse, but I still did it. And so when detectives got to the scene, he was super cooperative with them. He wasn't causing any problems, anything like that. He was just chatting. And this man was Duncan Martinez. Now, as detectives Kathy were driving him to the police station to book him, he actually said to one of the detectives, he's like, hey, can we swing by my apartment? I didn't bring my wallet with me. And if I'm going to need to bail myself out, I got to have a credit card or something. And because he'd been so cooperative, one of the detectives with him said, all right, you've been cooperative. We're happy to do it. So they get to the apartment and Duncan was like, okay, but while you're in there, can you feed my pet rat?
Rat?
Rat.
Yikes.
This was also Dateline. And, again, the detective's like, sure, I'm here. So the detective goes in, feeds the rat, and as he's doing so, this detective, Detective Pryor, he finds this day planner on the desk, and so, he's just flipping through it as he's feeding Ratatouille. He's flipping through it, and he comes across a business card for Detective Rick Jackson, LAPD, robbery homicide. So they take Duncan down to the jail, they book him, and Detective Pryor goes back to his office, and later in the morning, because remember this is at midnight, he puts a call into Detective Jackson and was like, hey, you know a guy named Duncan Martinez? And Jackson was like, yeah, let me tell you about this guy. And so he gave him a very brief synopsis, and so the Utah detective said, oh, I already know all about this. Duncan told me about this because when we picked him up, he said he was robbing the sporting goods store because he'd witnessed a murder in LA, and the person who actually committed the murder was extorting him and said, if you don't steal the stuff for me from the sporting goods store, I'm going to tell the police and make it seem like you were the killer all along. And so just like that, Duncan went from king for a day to court jester.
Boom.
He broke the deal with the LAPD because remember, he wasn't allowed to tell anyone about his conversation. And since he did, everything he told them could now be used to prosecute him. But Detective Jackson was like, you know what? We got to wrap this all up in a bow. So he asked the Utah detective to call Duncan and say, so you know that story you were telling me about a murderer who was trying to get you to steal stuff, or he was going to make it seem like you were the murderer? I can't really wrap my mind around this. Would you mind coming in and telling me about it in a little more detail? And Duncan said, sure, and went down to his office. Now, at the request of Detective Jackson, the Utah detective surreptitiously recorded Duncan. And as they talked, Duncan opened up and spilled all the tea about Ron's murder and Nathan Blaylock's role in it. Of course, the Utah detective called Detective Jackson and said, hey, I've got this recording. I'm going to send it to you. But the Utah detective added, how is this kid not remorseful about anything that happened to this guy that he called his best friend?
Shortly after this conversation, and now we're in early 1994, Duncan Martinez was indicted for first-degree murder. Nathan and Duncan stood trial separately, and Nathan had only been arrested just 2 months before Duncan. Anyway, Nathan went to trial first in March of 1996, and after 3.5 days of deliberation, he was found guilty and sentenced to LWOP, and he's currently serving at Mule Creek State Prison in Northern California. Duncan's trial was scheduled to take place in November of 1996, and right before trial, he was offered a deal by the prosecutors. They're like, look, plead guilty to second-degree murder, and you'll probably walk after 12 years. But he was like, no, I want a better deal. I just want probation. I'm not going to jail. And the prosecutors were like, ha, 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 ha.
Okay, I totally have this feeling that if they were drinking coffee or water at that same time, he would have gotten it
Right.
all over him, right?
Totally. Anyway, so the prosecutors were like, nay.
Fair maiden.
Exactly. So Duncan went to trial, and in late November, 8 months after Nathan's trial, Duncan was found guilty and sentenced to LWOP. So just when you think justice has been done, and that LWOP means LWOP, politics intervened. In June of 2020, now this is 30 years after Ron Baker was murdered and 24 years after Duncan Martinez and Nathan Blaylock were convicted, California's governor stepped in and commuted Duncan's sentence, saying that he dedicated himself to his rehabilitation and becoming a productive citizen.
Ironically, he served 25 years in prison, which means if he had taken the second-degree murder deal, he would have been out 13 years prior.
Yeah, but hubris, hubris.
Oh, absolutely.
So anyway, Duncan's sentence became just L without the WOP. And he was granted parole 6 months later. My big assumption, and it's a big assumption because I did not see any paperwork on the parole hearings, nor did you. We believe that because Duncan was not the one who did the stabbing, that he got out of jail. But Nathan Blaylock, as we said earlier, is still serving time. Duncan Martinez was released in April of 21, and now, at the age of 52, remains a free man. So we have received some expressions of concern about my brother Matt, and this recording of the podcast is sort of a nice respite for me because I'm spending probably 5 to 6 days a week on average in the hospital.
On top of work and kids and husband and whatnot.
Yeah. But yeah, my firm has been great. I mean, I'm of counsel at Coleman, and they have been absolutely fantastic about not overloading me with new cases. But it's been an overwhelming process. Matt is not doing well. He's still in ICU, where he will remain for the foreseeable future. Many organs are not well, but the miraculous thing is, number one, that he survived an aortic dissection. The number of doctors that said they're shocked that he's been alive this long. And then he kind of woke up out of sedation about a week ago, let's say. When I say woke up, I mean, it's like he's lucid. He can look at us, but he's on a trach tube, so he's mouthing sentences. So we're all kind of becoming experts at lip reading.
And he can smile.
Yeah, like he still has a sense of humor.
He does. I tested that out about a week ago. It works.
Kathy did a jig in front of him. No. But anyway, thank you for your expressions of concern and well wishes.
And prayers.
Yeah. And he's not by any means out of the woods. It's been a tough process, and it really has made me focus on my personal limitations, one being fear and the second one being impatience. You know, it's like you want to know it's wrong because you want to fix it, even though it's totally out of your control, you know, and surrendering to God is actually a difficult process.
It is.
But there have been little blessings sprinkled throughout. But he's in a bad situation. But fortunately, I mean, thank God, like we have good friends and good family. And so please continue your prayers of acceptance and healing. Actually, the other way around, healing and acceptance.
Yes.
And thanks so much.